The driver of the car that crashed and killed Atlanta native and former Indianapolis Colts football player linebacker Edwin Jackson has been sentenced to 16 years in prison. In February, Jackson, who went to Westlake High School, and his Uber driver, Jeffrey Monroe, were stopped on the side of an Indiana highway when Manuel Oriego Zavala's pickup truck veered onto the shoulder, killing both men. Hope Ford has the latest details from inside the courtroom today.
Manuel Oriego Zavala pled guilty in July of 2 counts of operating a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol content 3 times the legal limit in Indiana. The prosecutor in this case says the deaths of Jackson and Monroe were unnecessary fatal consequences from drunk driving. Monroe's widow called Oriego Zavala a drunk, a liar, a murderer, and a coward, while Mary Ellen Jackson, the mother of Edwin, called her son obedient, a mentor to his family, a best friend of his siblings, and a treasured teammate. She said her family's hearts were ripped apart and will always miss a beat. Oriego Zavala didn't address the court today, but he wrote a letter last month to the judge asking for forgiveness from the family, the courts, and God. He received the max sentence of 16 years, which he will serve consecutively. Oriego Zavala, a Guatemalan citizen, is in America illegally and faces deportation after he finishes serving his sentence. Jackson, who earned the nickname Pound Cake earlier in his career with the Arizona Cardinals, is obviously still missed by many. Since his death, an Edwin Jackson Memorial Scholarship was started in his honor by Colts owner Jim Irsay.